Well, my oldest daughter right now is 11 still, and she's in that phase where she really likes to learn stuff, and she likes to tell me the things that she learns. And if it's something that she is really excited about, something that she has something that she feels like a connection with, it's just even more elevated her desire to learn about those things. And she had a phase a while back where she was kind of obsessive with learning about different facts about animals. And so we would sit there and we'd watch nature documentaries. We had a zoo pass at the time, and we'd go to the zoo and we'd learn the facts, and she'd read the books. And so she'd always be spouting off facts about different animals. And I remember there was just a short period where she just wanted to learn all about lions, and so she was telling me information about lions, and she had read Chronicles of Narnia earlier, and she's like, oh man, and lion and tribe of Judah, all the stuff that she's learning from the Bible and about lions. And so she just grew in this wealth of knowledge about lions. Now, so she had all the knowledge, but I don't think she had the type of connection that she thought she had with lions. She didn't quite have the connection that someone that I've seen online has a connection. That's me. But this guy, that was me with the lion, by the way, roaring at a lion. Have you guys ever seen this guy on YouTube? Raise your hand if you've seen this guy. Anybody? Okay, you got homework to do. This guy's name is Dean Schneider is his name, okay? If you just look up Lion Guy on YouTube, you'll find him, because this guy doesn't just have knowledge about lions. This guy has something way deeper. He hangs out with lions. He's friends with lions. He's part of a lion tribe. And it's not just like a casual thing. It's not like he can just go up and sit with these lions. Like he's buddies with these guys. He sleeps with the lions, okay? He gets real close to the lion's mouth. I've seen them like put his head in their mouth, and it's comfortable for him, this connection. They give him kisses. Kisses? Is that what lions do, kisses? He's comfortable drinking the water at the same time. And of course, the one thing that you think like you would never do, you would never sit next to a lion while he is eating his prey with all of his lionesses around him, because that's where you die, right? Well, here he is doing that exact same thing. This guy is at a different level of connection. My daughter, she's got some knowledge about lions, but this guy, he is connected. He has an intimate relationship with these creatures. And we have to recognize that there is a difference between those two things. It is not enough for us in our marriages to just have knowledge about our spouse, to know things about them, and yet to not be deeply connected to them. Those two things are different. And especially if you've been married for the length of time that most of us in this room have been married, you're 15, almost 20 plus years, you're going on and continuing on, you've been together for a long time, you've got a long track record and a lot of information. You can say more about your spouse than anybody else could. You could probably tell them what they're thinking right now, but do you have a deep connection? I mean, are you really, really connected with your spouse? What I see happening a lot when people have length of time is they rely on their past and their time and their knowledge in their relationship, and they just begin to just let the connection kind of fade away. They usually have the connection higher when they first get together. They really want to connect, that kind of soul-to-soul, person-person connection. They want to have that emotional drive, that affection that draws them towards the other person. And then over time, that starts to fizzle out, and it just becomes, yeah, I know a lot about this person. We live together. We do this stuff. But are you really, really connected? In a lot of the counseling that we do in the church for marriages, across the whole team of pastors, emotional disconnection is not the thing that I would say is the disease that causes the death of a marriage. I would not point it and say, emotional disconnection, that's the thing, it's the thing that ruins the marriage at the surface. It's not the thing that you pinpoint right away. It's usually something like you've been in a battle, fighting, you can't stop, there's lack of forgiveness, there's resentment that's built up, maybe someone has had some sort of sexual immorality. Those things can kill a marriage. But if you start to dig underneath the root of almost every single thing that kills a marriage, this is maybe the thing that causes that disease. That at some point in time, you and your spouse start to separate from each other in terms of your connection. You start living your own lives again. You start kind of sleeping on your own side of the bed without ever crossing the other side. You start kind of just fading away from one another, and you're not spending that deep kind of soul-on-soul time with one another that you used to spend. And as that begins to develop, it starts to manifest itself as a core root issue in all these other things, infighting and sexual issues and all these things. So if we want to have strong, resilient marriages, if we want our marriages to have some sense of longevity and to not be subject to these diseases, these killers in our marriages, we need to make sure that we've got this working in the background, that we're always working for deeper connections within our relationships. So I want to talk about this tonight, and I want to take you first, and I've got all these passages up here so you can look up here, but I just want to go to the real pinnacle and first marriage passage and just tease this out of this one verse first and foremost before we get into our points. Genesis chapter 2:24, when God establishes the covenant of marriage, he says a few things. And one of the things that he says is that when a man and a woman get together, they are to leave the previous relationship that they have. They're to hold fast to one another. And then it says this line, and they shall become one flesh. And if you really think about what this is saying, this idea of being one flesh is communicating a lot. It's not just saying that husband and wife are to consummate the marriage through sexual relationship, but is it saying that? Well, I think that this is implied. It's implied that a husband and wife are one flesh physically in a sexual relationship, but I think it's much broader than that. That this is not just to be a sexual relationship as defined by this text, but the entirety of your relationship. The way that you see you and your spouse is kind of one entity. You're one unit, one union, and you are linked together as one. That union is inseparable, and it goes beyond just the physical components of your relationship, but it extends to other aspects of your relationship on those emotional and affection level parts of you as a person. So I want us to bolster us against this ability or this problem to be disconnected from our spouses. I want us to first start, I'm going to give you the first point early, and then I'll flesh this out for you here. What we need to do, if we're really fighting for our marriages to stay connected with one another, is we first and foremost need to fight in our own minds for us to have this holistic view of marriage, a holistic view of marriage. Our tendency is to choose or emphasize or highlight one aspect of our union over another. And you could easily say that this is something that we can give the stereotype to and say, men tend to emphasize the physical components of a relationship, while women tend to emphasize the emotional components of a relationship. I don't think those stereotypes hold true for all people, but you see that this is something that's always being talked about in the marriage space. Women want more emotional connection, men want more physical connection, and what I am trying to propose here is that when God put man and woman together in the garden, he says that it's supposed to be total, and it's supposed to be in balance. You're not supposed to think of it in one way or the other, but you have to think of both at the same time. And so we cannot fall prey to the tendencies to have a limited view of what God set up as marriage. Marriage is not just one of these aspects, it has to be both. And when we have that lens in our marriage, we begin to see our weak points or what we tend to emphasize in neglect of the other. So let me give you a few of those that will help you here. The first one is this. Your union, your marriage union, is both physical and emotional. You need to see that it is both physical, has a physical component to it, and emotional. What do I mean by that? Let me give you a little bit of a description of what I mean by physical. I don't just mean the sexual relationship. I mean all of the realities that have to do with your body and you living physically on this earth. So think about these things. These are physical components of your marriage. You live together in the same house. That's a reality that affects you being in a union where you're flesh on flesh with your spouse. You live in the same house. You share meals together. You share your bank accounts. You're united in the things that are related to the physical world, right? You hold hands. You have sexual intimacy. You have children. You're occupying the same space in the most general sense and in the most intimate sense. I don't think we can just say what it means to have a physical component to our marriage means that we're in a sexual relationship. It means much more than that. It's that we share all of who we are and what we have, whether that be our finances, whether that be our physical time that we have to give to one another. We're giving all of it to our spouse, and we're sharing that with one another in this oneness, unified kind of way. And so when it comes to that physical reality, we need to make sure that we understand that, yes, marriage is a physical thing. We shouldn't be thinking of marriage as just emotional or just physical, but we got to be careful to make sure that we understand it is physical. It is, and it's good to think that way, but that's not sufficient or holistic. We need to also understand that it's emotional. I want to take you to this passage here just to show you this. There's a lot that I think you can draw about this one simple word here, but as Peter is addressing husbands and wives in this passage, he says, husbands, what are you to do? You're to live with your wives, okay? Think about that as that physical reality, that physical component. You're to share your life. You're to live with them, cohabitate with them, enjoying your life with them in this type of unified one flesh way. Live with your wives, but that's now caveated by this second phrase. You're to do that. Not just live with your wives and that's all that matters, no, but with this qualification. In an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel since they are heirs through the grace of life. So what he's saying here is he's saying you're to live with your spouse in a physical way, but you can't neglect the fact that your spouse is a different person than you. They have a different personality, a different makeup, a different mind, and yet you're in flesh. So yes, you share two people sharing the same space, sharing the same bed, sharing a sexual relationship, sharing all things, sharing your food, everything, but you're to do it also understanding that they are a whole person, body and soul, and that they have things that they're going through in their mind and their emotions and their affections that you need to be considerate of as well. The idea, even the word here, understanding way, the word is gnosis, which in Greek is the Greek word for know. It's this idea you're to live with your spouse, your husband, your wife, here specifically your wife, in a way in which you can make sure you know her. That's a deeper level of knowledge. You're not just living with your spouse in the same place. You're living with a knowledge of your spouse, a deep knowledge. It's an intimate knowledge, this word gnosko. And I just find it so interesting that even the way that sexual intimacy is described in the Old Testament often uses that same phrase to know your spouse. And so we have this weird thing where we have a flipping. If you have a sexual relationship with your spouse, you are intimate and you know your spouse, and you have a spiritual bond or an emotional bond with your spouse. It's also used to know. And so we can't just say, well, I want to be closer with my spouse, and so I'm going to focus on the emotional things and not think about the physical things. You have to do both. Now, I'm talking about emotional disconnection here, but I just need to say, first and foremost, you need to have a holistic view and think of it both as physical and emotional. It's not just one or the other. But you also need to bring this little caveat to it. Love is not just an action. Love is not just an affection. Love is both an action or an affection. In Christian circles, it has become commonplace to emphasize one over the other. And depending on the Christian circles you're in, you will hear one emphasized over the other. People will say, love is a verb, love is an action. Even if you don't feel like it, you should do it, love. You hear that, right? And that's true biblically. But it's also true biblically that love is something that affects your affections. It's your affections, it's your emotions, it's your responses. It's your outpouring of yourself in some sort of way. It doesn't have to be out of control emotion, but in some sort of response that is an emotional response, not just a decision based off of duty or obligation. And so we have to balance both of these realities. Okay? So let me take you to, well, let me just first say, you know that love is an action, right? I think in our church, that's where we lean. Can you guys nod at me if that's what we're talking about? Love is an action, right? 1 John 3:8, I think it is, right? What are we supposed to love in? It's not just word, right? It's in deed and in truth. It's to do something. We're not just to say it. It's not just a word. It doesn't just mean just say I love you when we walk away and just ignore the people that need us. No, we have to act out of our love. But for us, we need to follow up with this and say it's also an affection. 1 Thessalonians 2:8, we covered this, I think, recently in a weekend sermon, but this idea of Paul speaking to the church and saying, being affectionately desirous of you. Like he has a passion, a desire to be with those in this church, and he caveats saying, it's an affection. Like I have an emotional response that I want to be with you. It's not just, I want to be with you. No, it's like, I have an affectionately desirous, plan for you here. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves because you had become very dear to us. This is emotional language. This is stating, I have affections that are part of my feelings that I have for you, that I am communicating with you in verses like this. Now, I know I'm jumping a little bit here. If you know the full context, I left it out, the ... because I don't want to distract us all here tonight, but this is sex verse. But this one even here too is stating that even in your physical relationship with your spouse, there is an emotional response that you should have. You're to rejoice in the wife of your youth in this sexual encounter. You're to have some sort of emotional response in your relationship with your spouse. You cannot just say, I know I need to do these things, and so I'm going to go and march through this, and just relegate this idea of the emotions and the affection side of thing and just put it off to the corner and say, well, that doesn't matter that much. As long as I'm doing what's right, as long as I'm showing sacrificial love, that's what matters. In some circumstances, if you're not feeling the love, I would say just go forward with the duty. Do what Christ calls you to do, love your spouse. But all of us should be aiming to bring those two things into a holistic, harmonious view, where we can say, I'm doing the things to show love, indeed in truth, to my spouse, loving them sacrificially, and at the same time, I am seeking to have my affections match that. I want my affections to match my actions. I want them to link up hand in hand. And so when I do something, I'm not just doing it out of duty, I'm doing it out of a genuine, affectionate desire for this person. Like I want to do it. I want to do it because I love you, not just because I have to. Those two things need to link up in our relationships. The third thing I want to clarify in this, to have a holistic view, is that, it's a little weird here, but love is both natural, meaning that it wells up spontaneously without you necessarily having to have it be generated with your own will or intention, but it's also learned. It's also learned. You growing in love for your spouse in this type of connected emotional way with your spouse is not just something that happens naturally, it's also something that you learn. Here's the example that it's the ooh and ah verse that all the ladies like that tells us about the natural sense, right? You got this whole situation, you got multiple girls involved here, and we finally get Rachel, and you get the response for Jacob, and he says, and they seemed to him after working for 7 years, seemed to him but a few days because the love he had for you. And we all go, oh. That's that natural kind of like, it doesn't matter what I have to do. I'm not even thinking about it. I love you so much, and it's just welling up out of me. The affections, the emotions I have for you, they are there, and no one's going to take them away. This is how your teenagers feel all the time. This is like, that's the natural desire. But then we also got to remember that while that is true, and that exists oftentimes in the early phases of relationship, sometimes as the relationship goes on, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we are working to continue to generate in our lives a type of affectionate love towards our spouse, an emotional love and connection to our spouse. Think about this verse. I know you've heard it taught here multiple times. What does this say? Train the young women to love their husbands. Think about that real quick. Talking to older women, to younger women, and saying, what are you to do? Train younger women to love their husbands. How do you do that? How do you train someone to have a love response for their husband, for their wife, for their kids? That's what this verse is saying you absolutely can find yourself in a place where maybe right now I'm not feeling the things that maybe I used to feel or I want to feel towards my spouse. But you know what? I'm going to work on this, and I'm going to learn how to now align what I know the scripture tells me to do out of my duty and obligation for my spouse. And now I'm going to work to learn how to bring my affections in line. I'm going to strive to unify these two things using my own will, and I am going to respond the way I want to respond and train myself how I wish I did respond to my spouse in that moment so that now my duty and my affections are lined up. All of us have that ability to do that with our spouse when your wife or your husband tells you something to do and you don't want to do it. Instead of responding like, oh, I don't want to do it right now, you can say, I would love to do that for you, honey. And you might not feel it at all, but maybe after doing it over and over and over again, you can train yourself how to do this. And even being a part of a group like this, one of the intents of this is that by learning from other people who are married and other people who have teenagers in the same way, you would learn from them how to do what God is calling us to do. We need to maintain that holistic view if we are to continue to push forward with connection. Because any one of these little things that we get wrong, if we just start to see it as physical and not emotional, if we just say it's an action, it's not an affection, it's natural and I'm not feeling it right now, if you think about it that way, then you're just going to say, well, I can't do it. We make ourselves the victim. We say, well, it's just not happening right now. I'm not feeling it right now. Or on the opposite end, if you just say, well, I'm feeling it, but they're not feeling it, and so I'm just going to give up, and I'm not going to do the things that need to be done. I'm not going to turn it into an action. I'm not going to value this natural side. I'm just going to treat it as a rote response. That can be a problem too. So if you want to develop a good emotional connection with your spouse, make sure you get a holistic view first and foremost. But then you need to actually and actively pursue this with your spouse. So simply put, actively pursue deep emotional connection. Once you get your mind wrapped around what this is all about, that the marriage relationship, this union, this one flesh union, encompasses all of this, and you need to think of it holistically, then you've got to make this commitment, this decision in your own mind that you are going to strive for this in your relationship. In your relationship. And you have to do this actively. This isn't something that can just happen naturally. You're not just going to sit around your house watching YouTube all day and scrolling through social media and have a deep connection with your spouse. You have to pursue this with each other. And that's why you're here in this group, and I know that, and I commend you for it. But this is something that we should all strive for. Let me take you to a few verses to show you a few things here. I'm taking you to Song of Solomon, okay? Don't get too excited. All right. Let's go out early to the vineyard, she says, and see whether the vines have budded, whether the grape blossoms have opened, and the pomegranates are in bloom. And then here's this phrase that we all think we love to hear. We would all love to hear it more often in this context, for sure. There I will give you my love, she says to Solomon. Think about that last line. There is something about being open and willing to give and receive love. There is something to this. Even when we read that line, there is something in me, at least, that stirs up and say, I like that phrase. Like, I like that. If Kelly came up here and said, hey, I'm going to give you my love, I'm like, hey, I don't know what that means, but I'm excited. Like, I like it. You're open. Like, you're expressing your desire to be in this relationship with me. That's good. I like that. We all like that. For us, if we're going to actively seek this relationship, this deep emotional connection with our spouse, we have to make sure that we've got that piece of the puzzle in place. And that is this, that we need to be personally available for connection. If you're closed off, if you're not open to it, If you're saying, yeah, I'm okay with this part of it, but not that part of it, or not right now, I'm busy, or you know what, we'll connect later. I mean, there's got to be some availability personally for you to be open to that type of connection, to be open to that. Let me take you to a few other verses just to make this point. And we did cover these recently in a weekend sermon, but we'll go over them again. 2 Corinthians 7 has a few things to say about this, and 2 Corinthians 6. Paul, speaking to the church, is really throwing them under the bus and saying, you guys have a problem. And the problem that you have is that you're not making room in your hearts for us. You're closed-hearted. You're shielded to the fact that I am wanting to be in this relationship with you. I want to be in a connection with you. I want to love you, and you are not open to it. You've closed your hearts. And so he says, make room in your hearts for us. And he goes on and says, we've done all these things. For I said that before, you are in our hearts. He's saying, I have you here. I want to be in deep relationship with you, but you're the problem right now. And I think some people in this room, you have one person in the relationship that says, bring it on. Let's have this deep relationship. Let's talk about everything. Let's share our souls. Let's get deep with one another. Let's know everything there is to know about the nooks and crannies of each other's lives because we are one flesh. That's how God made us. And the other one says, ooh, that's a little scary. I'm not sure about that. I'm going to kind of put up a wall. It can't happen unless both parties are available. So you, as the person listening right now, needs to be thinking, am I personally available? Am I available for my spouse to know me? Or am I closed off? Another verse, same idea. We have spoken to you freely, O Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to them. Oh, someone in the relationship is open as wide as they can be to be loved and to receive love and all that is there. It says, the problem is not that you're restricted by us. They're open. That's not the issue. You can't point the finger at your spouse, right? Paul's saying you can't point the finger at us as we're coming and doing the ministry. No, you need to point the finger at yourself because it says, but you are restricted by your own affections. You don't want to do it, and you have not tried to generate that kind of love for us. And it says then, you should widen your hearts also. If you are feeling that disconnectedness from your spouse and you really want to seek it, the first person you have to start with is yourself. And you've got to really ask yourself, am I really open for this? Am I open for true, deep physical connection with my spouse? And if you're not, then you need to just own it with your spouse. Repent it and say, you know what? I've been closed off for whatever reason. I want to be an open book with you. I want to have a deep connection with you, and I'm going to start today and do that. Not only is that a good way to strive for it, but there is something that you should also strive, which is just another layer of this. It's not just about being stopping to being closed-hearted. You don't just want to cease closed-heartedness. You want to do what he said, be open-hearted. But I like this phrase even better. It's tender-hearted. I think we should all strive to develop tender-heartedness for our spouse. Tender-heartedness, and it's a word that I just don't think we use very much anymore, tender-hearted. It's just the opposite, really, of hard-heartedness. It's soft-heartedness. It's tender. It's soft. That's the idea of this. And we're told that this is a positive Christian virtue that all Christians should have to one another. In Ephesians chapter 4, it's that we're to be kind to one another. And then here it is, tender-hearted, right? Tender-hearted. It conveys this idea that you have some sense of a tender feelings for someone. It's you're compassionate towards them. The way that I have thought about it is I used to do ceramics all the time when I was younger. I know, one more weird thing that I've done, and Ryan will put it on the screen with some picture with the ghost guy behind me or something. But I used to do ceramics, and ceramics, they all have different phases. And when you're making your vessel, your pot in the beginning, and the clay is soft, and you add water to it, just makes it even softer. Any and everything you do to that piece has an effect. Every tool you put up to it makes an imprint and some sort of movement of the clay. Every time you push out, there's an additional growth of the vessel. If you put any weight on it, the vessel is crushed because the clay is soft. It is receptive to anything that comes in contact with it. And so you have to be really careful what you do with that clay during that phase, because anything you do is going to affect the shape of that clay. And to some degree, I think that helps me think about what this means to be tenderhearted. I'm to be soft towards my spouse, to think anything that I say or do to my spouse, I need to, or I would say it this way, anything that is going on with my spouse should affect me like I can affect that clay. I'm tender towards it. If my spouse is carrying a burden, that I feel that burden because I'm soft to her reality. I'm tender-hearted towards her. I'm soft towards her. If she is full of joy and rejoicing and celebrating, then there needs to be a response from me because I'm soft to what's going on with her. There's a reciprocal response from what is going on in her life to what's going on in my life. And even if you think about this in the way it's phrased in other passages like 1 Peter 3:7, husbands, do not be harsh with your wives, right? The idea here is that you're not to jam what you want to get done. You're to deal with your wife in a what way? A gentle way. There needs to be some response on our part for how we engage one another, where we are seeking to be people who respond in softness towards our spouses. When they've got something going on, it's going on for you. When they want to talk, you want to talk because you are soft to them, tender-hearted. You have compassion for them. You want to provide for their needs, care for them. That's what God is calling us to do. So we need to develop a tenderheartedness for our spouse. And lastly, to fill this out, without saying even more directly here, you need to seek out your spouse's heart. And there's a lot of application that we can draw from this. Hopefully you draw some application in your individual, couple, and group questions that you're going to go over. But to seek out your spouse's heart, to find time to dive into the depths of your spouse's soul and to know that you know them. That was complicated. But everybody needs to know that they're known by their spouse. They need to know that you know them and that you're linked up with them. You're synced up. You know what's going on. You know what's happening. You know their deepest fears. You know their desires. You know their anxieties. You know what keeps them up at night. You know the nightmares they're having. You know the things that they're dreaming of and they really want to happen with the kids. You know the things that, everything. We need to know what's going on with each other. And to linger with each other, even in short moments, and have these open conversations to say, what's going on with you? You know, how can I pray for you? What is happening in your heart? We need to have that kind of desire for our spouse. So a few verses here we read recently. Ecclesiastes 9. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love. I mean, we are supposed to, I know that this is Ecclesiastes and we got some crazy theology going on here, but as Solomon is considering all the things underneath the sun and he's looking at the different aspects, he looks and he says, not much has any value. Work has some value, so enjoy your work that you do under the sun. Not much has value, just eat and drink, because just the simple things have a little bit of value. And in this context, he's like, all the things that you can pursue after, one of the things that does have some value in this life, not nearly enough as fearing the Lord, but some value is enjoy your spouse. Seek to be in deep connection, enjoy the relationship. Be connected with one another in a way that you walk away saying, I like that person. I want to spend more time with them. That's not how everybody is. We need to all have that kind of relationship with our spouse. We say, I want to be with this person. Ultimately, again, I know the context of this verse, but as a general sentiment, I think that this next verse is what we all want. It's what we all want. You want to be able to say this to your spouse. I am my beloved's. They know me. I am theirs. This is it. We are connected. We are united. And you know what? Their desire, it's for me. Their affections, their care, their attention, their time, their emotions, it's directed towards you. It's like a jealous love that is oriented towards us because we are together in this. I think if we can strive to do these type of things, to be available, to try to develop softness towards our spouse in all circumstances, and then just to go after each other, to develop this affectionate desire and deep connection with one another, then we're going to stave off in so many different areas of our lives the diseases that can come later in our marriages when we don't have this deep connection. So tonight, let me just end, and I'll give you some time in your groups tonight and not go long, but let me just end by saying, let us all work on this week. You have individual questions that you could do by yourself, just to do some evaluation and say, hey, what are the things that I need to think through? And then some stuff to share with your spouse. I've written these every week here when we've done this series. They are hard to write, and I'm trying not to cause fights in your relationship, okay? I want you to utilize this for this end, to grow in relationship with your spouse, to cover these things, to strengthen and solidify your marriage against these threats. And so I hope that you'll do that in your groups tonight and at home. All right, let's pray. God, help each and every one of us to really think according to your word in regards to marriage. It is so easy for us to have our minds not transformed by your word, but conformed to this world and the way it thinks about marriage and life. God, we don't want that to be the case. We want our minds to be transformed by your word and to think rightly about this union that you've given us to walk in. God, we want to honor you with our marriages. That is our ultimate desire. We want you to be pleased with us, as we've talked about in the past. God, we want you to say, well done and faithful servant, as it is in regards to our relationship with our spouse. And God, we want to honor you with it. And God, we know one of the ways in which we do that is that we are deeply connected to one another in this one flesh relationship that you designed from the beginning. And so God, preserve each and every one of our relationships, not only that our marriage would last to the end, but it would last and it would have that quality to it, that it would have that depth to it, where we would be best friends with the person that you've united us with, that we would be people who love each other in a holistic sense. And so, God, we ask that you would even begin that work in us now as we consider these in our groups and in our own time. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.